The letter was thin, yellowed, and unassuming, just 1 page from the Whitlock County Registrar's office. Elias Morgan, 68, read it 3 times before he set it down on the table, hands trembling not from age, but from something deeper. We are currently seeking a verified descendant or legal heir to claim stewardship of Parcel 84A, formerly Whitlock Estate, under Georgia Ordinance 17.3b. He looked out the window at the field beyond the broken porch rails. That was the land. The same land he had mowed, watered, fenced, and watched over for 33 years, through storms and summers, through good years and years when the town forgot his name. Elias wasn't the heir, but he was the only one who ever stayed. 12 hours north, in a penthouse lined with cold glass and framed magazine covers, Mason Carter tapped his fingers against the edge of his desk. An assistant had just forwarded him the notice. "Whitlock Estate," Mason muttered. The name triggered something. Not memory, exactly. More like a shadow brushing past memory. He Googled it. County land, undeveloped. But whispers online said the whole corridor had been quietly rezoned for private development. Value? Millions. Then his eyes landed on a line in the fine print. Currently occupied by one Elias Morgan, longtime caretaker. Mason stood up too fast. Elias Morgan. He hadn't heard that name in 12 years. Hadn't said it aloud since the day he boarded a bus with a scholarship and left that man in a fading brown coat standing at the depot. No hugs. No promises. Just silence. The land could be his. But first, he needed to know what Elias still remembered. In Georgia, the wind pushed through the cracked window panes of Elias's cottage. Dust floated in slivers of sunlight. On the mantel, 2 items sat untouched. A photo of a young boy with blonde hair in oil-stained overalls and a rusted toy train. He had kept them all these years. He didn't know the boy now sat on Forbes covers and Forbes panels. He only knew this. The letter didn't say, "Thank you." Didn't say, "We remember." It just said, "Return what was never yours." And somewhere, between a billionaire in a skyscraper and an old man in a decaying farmhouse, a story began to unravel. A story about land and loyalty, about bloodlines and broken truths, about how far a man can run from love, and how close justice always waits. Because some inherit land, others inherit silence, but only a few inherit the burden of knowing who really kept the roots alive. At 5:07 a.m., the screen door creaked open. Elias Morgan stepped out onto the porch of the house no one else had entered in years. He wore the same work shirt he'd worn every Monday since 1992. 2 buttons missing. Right sleeve patched with denim from an old pair of jeans. In his hand, a chipped enamel mug, steam curling up like a ghost. The land stretched before him like a memory half awake. Acres of soil that still knew his name, even if the town had forgotten it. He started his morning like he had for 3 decades. Checked the fence line, refilled the bird bath near the sycamore, swept the porch even though no one ever visited, stopped by the old gate, and ran his hand over the rusted latch. Elias didn't own the land, but the land belonged to him in a way that paper could never explain. There was no electricity in the back rooms. The heater hadn't worked since the Christmas before last. The pantry held 3 cans of black-eyed peas and a half-loaf of cornbread wrapped in wax paper. But he didn't complain. He never complained, because in the quiet of that land, with no audience and no reward, he still had something sacred. Dignity that didn't require witnesses. Some days, the local kids called him Gatekeeper Ghost. Others just called him Crazy Mr. Morgan. They didn't know he once rebuilt train engines with his bare hands. Didn't know he raised a boy who once called him Dad. They didn't ask, and Elias didn't offer. Inside, everything was kept where it always had been. The tin box with Gloria's wedding ring sat behind the spice rack. A single railroad pocket watch still ticked in the drawer, always 5 minutes fast, and taped to the side of the fridge, a photo of Mason as a boy, standing in front of the mailbox, arms crossed, gap-toothed and proud. "My son," Elias once whispered to the mailman, "even if he forgets, I won't." He had forgotten Elias's birthday, forgotten Gloria's funeral, forgotten how to write letters, forgotten to come home. But Elias remembered everything. Every scraped knee, every school project glued together with mismatched buttons, every night spent holding a flashlight so Mason could read. He remembered how the boy stopped calling him Dad the day he got accepted to the university in the North. He remembered the day the bus pulled away and the window stayed closed. Now, 12 years later, all Elias had was the land, the silence, and a name that meant nothing in the world his son now ruled. And yet every evening he still lit the porch light, just in case. That same afternoon, a realtor's truck passed by the road and slowed. Elias squinted. He didn't wave. The man leaned out the window. "You Morgan?" Elias nodded. "You still watching that dirt for Whitlock?" Elias didn't reply. The man shook his head and laughed. "They say a new developer's coming soon. Hope you packed." He drove off. Elias stood at the gate a little longer than usual that day, watched the sun sag behind the tree line, listened to the wind whisper things only the wind knew. He reached down, grabbed a handful of soil, and closed his fist around it like a secret. "You can buy land," he murmured, "but you can't buy what remembers who cared for it." Inside, the porch light flickered once, then held steady. The photo on the fridge leaned ever so slightly. The train toy on the shelf tilted just an inch, as if leaning toward the door. The house didn't know what was coming. But Elias did. He just didn't say it out loud. Not yet. The town hadn't changed much. A few new signs. A closed-down diner-turned-vape shop. A billboard with peeling paint that still read, "Vote honestly." But Mason Carter had. The billionaire stepped out of the black SUV in a navy-tailored suit and $900 shoes that did not like gravel. The town stared and whispered. No one recognized him. And that was exactly how he liked it. He didn't drive past his childhood house. Didn't stop at the depot where Elias had waved goodbye 12 years ago, and never again. He went straight to the county records office, smiling, calculating, controlled. "I'm here regarding parcel 84A, he said. The clerk didn't look up. "Name?" "Mason Whitlock." He didn't blink. The lie slid from his lips like it had been waiting all along. The woman typed, checked a file, paused. "There's a caretaker on record, Elias Morgan. Been on the property over 30 years. Mason smiled. "Yes, I believe he used to work for my grandfather." He left with a copy of the original deed, rezoning documents, and a contact for the real estate firm already eyeing the land. No one questioned him. No one ever did anymore. But later that evening, parked outside the old wooden house on the ridge, Mason hesitated. The porch light was on. Still on. He expected that it wouldn't be. He expected the man to be gone, or sick, or somewhere lost in time. But no, there he was, Elias Morgan, standing by the gate, shirt faded, boots cracked, but spine straight like a blade. Mason didn't get out of the car. He sat, watched. In the dark, his own reflection in the glass window almost looked like the boy in that old photo. Inside the house, Elias didn't look out. He knew who was parked there. He'd known the moment the engine stopped. But he didn't walk out. Didn't knock on the window. Didn't say, "Welcome home." He simply turned off the stove, wiped the counter, and sat by the window with a cup of lukewarm tea. Waiting. Not for an apology. Just waiting to see what kind of man had come back. Mason finally stepped out of the car. No cameras, no entourage. Just him, and a storm of things he hadn't named in over a decade. The wooden gate creaked as he opened it. Elias didn't move. "Hey," Mason said. The word came out softer than he meant. Elias looked up. A long beat of silence passed between them. Then the old man spoke. "You hungry?" Mason froze. "Not. Where have you been?" Not, "Why are you here now?" Not even, "Do you remember me?" Just the same question Elias had asked 1,000 times before. They ate in near silence. Cornbread. Greens. Mason didn't ask what kind of meat. He just ate it. Elias didn't press. Didn't ask about the money, the suits, the car. But Mason noticed his eyes linger on the empty seat across the table, where Gloria used to sit. And suddenly the room felt too full of ghosts. After dinner, Mason stood. "I won't stay long," he said. Elias just nodded. Mason paused. "I came because there's a land issue, some inheritance mess. I thought I should check." Elias tilted his head. The look in his eyes wasn't surprise. It was something far more cutting. Recognition. He didn't answer. Just stood. Walked to the kitchen and pulled out a folded envelope from the cupboard. "Lawyer dropped this off 2 weeks ago," Elias said. He handed it to Mason. Inside were all the details. The same parcel, the same clause. Mason read in silence. His hands shook just a little, because in that moment he realized the land was never unclaimed. It had always belonged to someone. Not legally, but something deeper than law. That night Mason didn't sleep. He didn't leave. He just sat on the porch, looking out at the same field he once played in with a plastic toy plane, and Elias's laughter behind him. He thought of money. He thought of legacy. He thought of what he might be able to take, and of what he might never be able to give back. For 3 days, Mason stayed in town. He said it was to handle paperwork. He told himself it was to explore options. He told the real estate firm he was securing rightful title, but none of that was the truth. He was buying time to decide what kind of man he was going to be. The first lie was easy. At the lawyer's office downtown, he filled in the blank. Mason Whitlock, grandson of Thomas Whitlock. There was no Thomas Whitlock. Not in his blood, not in his bones. But in the system? In the file? There was now. He signed. Hand steady. Heart? He didn't check. Back at the farmhouse, Elias didn't ask where Mason went during the day. He simply made breakfast, washed the dishes, sat on the porch and read a Bible so old the spine was held together by black electrical tape. Sometimes he hummed gospel songs under his breath. Sometimes he just sat and looked at the trees. He never mentioned the land, never asked Mason to stay, never asked why he came, and that silence burned more than any lecture ever could. Mason began staying out longer, avoided the house after dark, ate in town, answered phone calls with the volume turned low. He met with the development firm at a diner on Route 6. "We've got investors lined up," the rep said, grinning. "The moment you get legal possession, this thing turns into pure gold." Mason nodded. The man added, "The caretaker's still there?" "Yes." "Will he be an issue?" Mason hesitated. Then, "He's old, quiet. He won't fight." That night, Mason returned late. The porch light was still on. Again, Elias was asleep in his chair, a blanket over his knees, the toy train on the side table next to a folded napkin with Mason's name on it. Inside the napkin, 2 pieces of fried chicken. Cold. Mason stood there, the quiet so loud it made his stomach turn. He left them untouched. The next morning, Elias spoke first. "You met with the land boys?" Mason froze. He hadn't said a word about it. "How'd you know?" Elias didn't answer. He just looked out across the field. Then, without turning, "Land's just dirt if you don't stand for something on it." Mason didn't reply, because he knew what he was standing on wasn't his, but the momentum had started. Paperwork was being filed. Contracts were being prepared. He'd even received a tentative schedule from the county zoning board for a heirship hearing. And every step he took deeper made it harder to turn back. One afternoon, a boy knocked on the farmhouse door, 10 years old, dark-skinned, with shoelaces untied and a crumpled notebook in his hand. "Are you Mr. Morgan?" he asked shyly. Elias nodded. "My school says I gotta interview someone who lived through segregation." Elias smiled faintly. "You sure you don't want to talk to someone more famous?" The boy grinned. They said you got stories. Elias waved him in. Then I suppose we better tell one. Mason watched from a distance. He hadn't seen Elias laugh in years, maybe ever, and for a split second something cracked in him. But cracks don't matter when greed has already poured concrete inside. That evening, Mason received an email from the law firm. All forged documents have passed preliminary validation. You will be listed as the legal heir unless contested within 10 days. 10 days. 10 days for Elias to speak. 10 days for Mason to come clean. 10 days for justice to slip away or punch through the silence. Mason didn't sleep that night. He sat in the living room staring at the old photo of himself on the fridge. The boy in the picture looked proud. Not of himself, but of the man standing behind the camera. The man who built a life without a title, who raised a child without a bloodline, who stayed when staying was the harder choice. But now it was Mason's choice that would define the story. Not the press, not the lawyers, not the investors, him and him alone. The next morning, Elias rose before the sun. He boiled water on the stovetop, poured it over instant coffee, and sat at the same table where Mason used to do homework under a flickering light bulb. But this time he wasn't waiting for his son to speak first. He pulled a metal file box from beneath the floorboards. It was dented, scratched, and locked with a rusted padlock. Elias slid a small key from behind an old picture frame and opened it. Inside were documents wrapped in wax paper, some yellowed with age, some crisp and recent. All of them proof. A 33-year-old contract from the Whitlock family giving Elias full custodial oversight of Parcel 84A. Monthly maintenance records signed by 2 deceased county clerks. Photographs time-stamped over decades. Elias tending crops, repairing fences, repainting the barn. A notarized letter from Gloria Morgan, his late wife, describing how she and Elias saved the land from foreclosure during the 90s drought. And finally, a letter written by Old Man Whitlock himself, not legally binding, but stamped and sealed. This land owes more to Elias Morgan than it ever did to me. Should I pass before the law is updated, I trust him with what paper will not. Elias placed the bundle inside a brown envelope, sealed it, and wrote in bold block letters, "For the county court, in case of contested claim." Then he slipped on his coat, dusted off his old boots, and walked the 2.3 miles to town. He didn't ride with Mason. He didn't ask for a favor. He just walked, head up, step steady. At the courthouse clerk's office, the young woman looked up, surprised. "Mr. Morgan, how can I help?" Elias slid the envelope across the counter. "He'll claim it," he said simply. "This as I already did." Back at the farmhouse, Mason was on a call with the real estate team when he saw Elias walking back along the road. No car, no conversation. Just returning. Mason felt a chill. He didn't know why. That night, Elias sat on the porch with a slice of peach pie. He didn't offer Mason any. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. Mason approached anyway. "Did you go into town?" he asked. Elias didn't answer right away. He pointed toward the tree line. "You see that sycamore?" Mason nodded. Elias sipped his coffee. "I planted that the year your mama passed. It almost didn't take. But I watered it every week, even when I was sick, even when the well dried up. Some things grow because you love them. Others just get built fast and die faster." Mason didn't speak, because he understood the message. He was the tree that left, and Elias was the one who stayed, roots and all. 3 days later, a notice appeared on the county board. "A formal claim has been submitted by Mr. Elias Morgan to retain stewardship and historic custody of Parcel 84A. Hearing scheduled. Public input welcomed." Word spread fast, faster than Mason expected. People remembered Elias, more than he thought. The schoolboy who had interviewed him? He told his entire class. The local pastor? Announced it during Sunday service. The mailman? He pinned a note on the post office board. Let's not forget who kept this town stitched together while the rest of us moved on. By the end of the week, Mason's polished narrative was cracking. His own PR team called him. "Sir, there's a story circulating online about your past. It's gone semi-viral." He didn't answer. He didn't need to, because for the first time, he realized he had miscalculated the power of quiet dignity. Elias didn't need a lawyer. He had lived the proof. He didn't need an audience. He had the land. He didn't need to shout. He had built a life loud enough in silence. The hearing was now inevitable. So was the confrontation. But Elias wasn't afraid. He'd already stood the test of storms, time, and betrayal. He could stand for 10 more days. The courthouse was small. 2 rows of wooden benches. A ceiling fan that never stopped squeaking. The Georgia seal hung crooked above the judge's seat, and someone had brought a pitcher of lemonade no one touched. Mason Carter had been in bigger rooms, bigger buildings, bigger courts, bigger stakes, but none of them ever made his heart race like this one did. Elias Morgan sat at the front, not beside a lawyer, but beside a folding chair with a single manila folder in his lap. Mason, dressed in a $3,000 suit, adjusted his tie for the 4th time. The people in the room didn't flinch at his entrance. No one rose. No one clapped. Some didn't even look at him. But every single pair of eyes found Elias. The judge cleared her throat. "This is a hearing to determine legal custodianship of Parcel 84A, also known as the Whitlock Estate, currently occupied by Mr. Elias Morgan and claimed by Mr. Mason Whitlock." She paused. "Carter?" Mason swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor." The clerk began to read aloud the documents. One by one, Mason's team had submitted birth certificate, forged, lineage documentation, fabricated, heirship testimony, scripted. It all sounded official, cold, paper perfect. Then the judge turned to Elias. "And your submission?" Elias stood, quietly, unshaken. He handed her the manila folder. "I brought what's true." She read in silence. The contract, the letters, the photographs, the maintenance logs, the notarized testimony of Gloria Morgan. And lastly, the handwritten note from old Mr. Whitlock himself. The room was still. Then Elias turned, not to the judge, but to the people seated behind him. "I didn't come here to fight," he said. "I came here to remind." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse Mason. He didn't even look at him. He just spoke, as if dusting off a truth too old to defend itself. "I was never asked to keep that land. I was trusted. And I stayed. Through storms, through droughts, through everything, except recognition." He paused. "But I didn't stay to be remembered. I stayed because someone had to. And because my wife said, sometimes the soil needs your hands before it needs your name." Silence. Then, one by one, townsfolk stood up. A teacher. Mr. Morgan fixed the broken fence around the schoolyard. He wasn't paid. He just saw it needed fixing. A pastor. When the food pantry burned down, he cleared the rubble before we even asked. A teenager. He gave me a bike once, said, "Even broken things still move." And finally, a woman in her 50s stood, holding an old photo. "He took this of my parents when they renewed their vows on the land. We didn't have a photographer." He said, "Memories are worth saving too." Mason stared at his hands. He couldn't remember the last time he was called son without a PR team scripting it. Couldn't remember the last time he gave something without a return. Couldn't remember why he ever stopped calling Elias Dad. The judge cleared her throat again. "We will take these testimonies into record. A formal ruling will be issued after review." But no one needed to wait. The room had already ruled, not with laws, but with truth. Outside, reporters tried to approach Mason. He said nothing. For once, the man who built empires from words had none left. Inside, Elias folded up his folder and tucked it under his arm. He nodded politely to the clerk. Thanked the janitor on his way out. Didn't say a word to Mason. Not out of spite, but because the lesson had already landed. That night, Mason sat on the porch alone. Elias was inside, asleep. The porch light was still on. Just like it always had been, Mason stared at it. And for the first time, he realized. It wasn't a light to welcome him home. It was a light to show that someone never left. The ruling came quietly. No cameras, no press conference, just a stamped envelope in a county-issued folder delivered to both parties. Elias opened it at the kitchen table. Mason stood across from him, arms folded, unreadable. The court recognizes Mr. Elias Morgan as the rightful steward and custodian of Parcel 84A. Mr. Mason Carter's claim is hereby dismissed, with prejudice. Mason didn't say anything at first, just looked at the words he had tried to bend, words that wouldn't bend this time. Elias nodded once, folded the letter, placed it neatly in the drawer beside old train tickets and a broken keychain Mason once made from scrap metal. "I didn't win," Elias said calmly. "I just stayed long enough to still be standing." Mason sat down. For the first time since returning, he looked tired. Not from business, but from being human again. He cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he said. "It was too late, and yet still necessary." Elias didn't respond with forgiveness. Not yet. He simply pointed to the window. "You see that oak tree?" Mason looked. It was old, gnarled, split down the center. That tree was struck by lightning back in '87. Split clean through. Thought it was done for, but it kept growing. Not the same, but stronger where it healed. Elias didn't need to explain the metaphor. The next day, Elias returned to the county office, but not to collect payment. He signed a land use agreement, granting long-term access for a youth farming co-op, a community greenhouse, and a local history center to preserve stories of forgotten laborers who once kept Whitlock County alive. He didn't name it after himself. He named it after Gloria. "She believed in planting things that outlived us," he told the clerk. Later that week, Mason made one last stop. Not at the farmhouse, not to the court, but to the old train station. It was boarded up now, faded, forgotten. But he remembered the bench, the suitcase, the silence, the man who had waved goodbye, and never stopped waiting. He sat there for a while, watching nothing happen. Then he took a pen and a torn piece of paper from his wallet, wrote 7 words, folded it, and mailed it to no one in particular. Elias received it 3 days later. No return address, just the sentence. "I went too far, but not blind." He folded it, tucked it in the Bible, right between Exodus and Psalms. That Sunday, the church pew was fuller than usual. Elias didn't speak. He never did. But someone had placed an old photo on the community board. A man and a boy building a fence together, smiling. Underneath it, he built more than fences. No name, no caption, but everyone knew. That evening, Elias stood at the porch, watching the golden haze over the soil. Mason wasn't there. He didn't need to be. The land was quiet again, but not forgotten. And this time the silence didn't feel empty. From far away, the sun dipped below the tree line, casting long shadows that no longer felt threatening. Just old. Just earned. Elias touched the porch rail. The same one he'd repaired 24 times over the years. It was cracked, worn, familiar. He didn't replace it. He just sanded it smooth, because some things shouldn't be erased. They should just be made ready for hands that finally know how to hold them. This is the resolution. It's not about ownership, not about courtrooms, not even about forgiveness. It's about what stays after everything else leaves. A year later, the land looked different, not because it had been sold, but because it had been used. There were rows of kale and spinach now, tended by local teens in mismatched gloves. There was a greenhouse built from recycled windows. There was a bench under the old sycamore where a plaque now read, "Dedicated to the ones who stayed." No name, just truth. Elias Morgan never asked to be remembered, but somehow he was. The community center, named the Gloria House, opened quietly on a rainy Saturday. No ribbon cutting, no speeches, just the door unlocked and the sign hung with care. Inside were framed letters from townsfolk and one anonymous envelope with no return address. Elias opened it in private. Inside, a check. 6 figures, no note, Just a name scribbled on the memo line. MC. He didn't deposit it for 3 days. When he did, he used it to build a computer lab. No one knew who paid for it. And that felt right. One evening, Elias stood alone at the edge of the property, watching a boy water the kale beds. The boy looked just like Mason did, back when he still believed in fireflies and blue ribbons. He asked Elias, "Did you build all this?" Elias shook his head. "I just kept it alive long enough for someone else to build it." He went home and sat on the porch. The porch light was still working. So was the old radio, crackling out a gospel tune that only he seemed to know the words to. The train toy was still on the shelf. A little cleaner now. Less rust. And in the fridge, a new photo. This time not of Mason, but of the greenhouse kids, covered in dirt, laughing over a broken wheelbarrow. They weren't his, but somehow they were. That night, as the wind stirred through the trees, Elias wrote something down for the first time in a long time. He wasn't writing a will. He wasn't making a statement. He was writing a reminder, in case someone, someday, needed to know what legacy really meant. He folded the paper, placed it in a wooden box beside the Bible, locked it. On the envelope, he wrote, "For the next one who thinks they own this." Somewhere across the country, Mason Carter walked through an empty conference hall after a keynote event. People shook his hand, praised his comeback, admired his humility. But his mind wasn't there. It was on a field in Georgia, a light on a porch, a man who had already forgiven him, without ever saying the words. And suddenly Mason understood. Forgiveness isn't a conversation, it's a direction. He booked a flight. He didn't take it. Some journeys don't start with airports. One last scene. Elias, older now, slower. He steps onto the porch and sits in the same chair. Looks out at the field. The kale rows now replaced by tomatoes. The greenhouse now shaded by tall vines. The land has changed hands, but not hearts. He smiles, not because everything is perfect, but because something important was never lost. A kid rides by on a bike, waves. "Mr. Morgan!" he shouts. Elias lifts a hand in reply. "Don't forget to water the ones in the back." The boy nods and disappears down the dirt road. The camera stays on Elias, just him, the porch, the light, the land. No music, just wind, soft and steady. Just roots, deep and silent. Just memory, the kind that doesn't fade, because it never needed a spotlight to begin with. Some people build empires, some inherit names, but the ones who matter are the ones who stay. Not to be seen, but to keep things alive. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just waits, in the shadows.